Thanks, Alfie. This is one of the great things we do in this committee. And today we're about to hopefully agree to give away $1.2 million in grants for an excellent purpose, which is our cultural initiative grants for marae development and Papakayanga funding. So I'd love to invite Jane and Annie and Shane to the table, and I hope that councillors did avail themselves of the drop-in sessions. They were excellent. So we'll assume that you have a background in this, but we do have a short presentation. I'll hand it over to you, Jane, to introduce your team, if you're there.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, ki te hia mana, koro matua koutou ko councillors katoa. Yes, it's a great pleasure to be here today in my role as Māori Outcomes Lead to present the recommendations for disseminating $1.2 million of the Cultural Initiatives Fund. As you say, I'm joined here today by Ani Makia, Kai Tohu Marae, and Shane Cook, Principal Advisor Māori Housing, and really want to acknowledge them both and Shane's team, who collectively work really hard to partner with marae and other Māori partners to advance marae and Papakayanga development. As noted by our current chair, this is an annual report. The process and value of fund hasn't changed, and we did have 3 drop-in sessions for councillors to be able to talk to us about the process and proposed recommendations prior today, and thanks to the councillors that joined us. So with that in mind, we'd like to take the paper as read, and as stated, we've just got this short presentation. The purpose of this is to provide a bit of feedback to councillors on the difference the grant has been making in the last year or so, and Ani will talk to the marae slides, Shane to the Papakayanga slides, and then it's just a couple more summary slides that I'll touch on at the end before finishing up. Kia ora. Kia koe, Ani.
Ka pai, can I just check that you can see the presentation?
Kia ora, yes.
Tēnā koutou. A tēnā tātou katoa, tūtahi me mihi atu ka tika ki a koe Papa Alf mo tō reo whakamoimiti te ata nei. Atu anō ki te tia mana hou mo te wānei e te kaikaunihera whaia Kathy. Huri noi te ruma ki a koutou katoa te koromatua, ngā kaikaunihera pērai ki a Josephine Bartley mā, ngā pau hāpai i ngā mahi motuake o te puari matua o IMSB. Ka tira ki taki angitu, tīma angitu, i rungi te hui topa nei ko Jane Aiken raua ko Shane, ko Ani Makia tōku ingoa, ko au te kai tohu mā ngā marae o Tāmaki Makaurau. Hi everyone, great to be here again. It's only been a year since I've done this, and yeah, it's getting a lot easier, I hope. So we're wanting to showcase a couple of our successful recipients for marae development funding in the current funding year. So Te Ringa Waka o Orewa Marae was one of those recipients. They applied for some pūtea funding to develop their car park area. So as you can see from the pikitia that we're showcasing today, they predominantly wanted to improve access for their kaumātua tangata haua and their manuhiri, that's the elderly, the disabled and the visitors to the marae. And they've come close to consenting requirements. There's still a little bit of work to undertake there. They also have enhanced their safety and security for all users at the marae, and just thinking about the whaioranga aspects of this mahi, they're promoting inclusivity for tangata haua, which is the disabled whānau, to come to the marae. So that's always a good thing. The second marae that we're showcasing is Te Tiraho marae, based in Pamua, in my backyard. They received $15,000 from the current Cultural Initiatives Fund for the upgrade of their electrical components. So they had an old switchboard from the 1960s, way before I was born. And when I visited the marae, they explained that they were having power outages and power shortages around the marae, so desperately needed to change this. And so that's what their funding has done, and it's it's improved the capacity of the marae hugely. So those are from the marae development funding, and we're going to move to Papakayanga. Tēnā koutou.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Shane tuku ingoa no tūwharetoa me nā te rakawa ki te tonga o ku iwi. No whare mo te Māori tuku mahi, Principal Māori Housing Development Programs Office. I do like this part of the year. I get to showcase some of the mahi that we've done. So today I'm going to talk about Ngāti Whātua ki Ōrake and their kaumātua housing at Atareta Street. This is a development of 10 duplex 2-bedroom units, joining the existing 9 that they already have up on the hill. The CIF grant in this instance assisted with offsetting the development contributions and regulatory costs, but today I can show you the built outcome. This was a $5 million build. They partnered, Ngāti Whātua partnered with GJ Gardner Homes. Staff also assisted the trusts, or my team, the Māori Housing Units, also assisted the staff to secure an additional $1.5 million of additional government funding by leveraging the relationships we have with Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and Te Puni Kōkiri. These houses were officially opened in late January 2022. Some of you may have been fortunate enough to go to the opening. Next slide, please. The next one is a project that's been running for a few years, and it is a fund that we funded probably, I think it was 2 cycles ago. It's Te Mahurihiri Marae. This is a $6.8 million project. It's a project for 14 units of a 3- and 4-bedroom housing mix. After many delays caused by COVID and the logistics of actually managing 2 capital works on the site, as you can see on the second slide to the right, in the background, there's Taumatua Kupe, which is a education centre that they're also doing in the marae at the same time as they're doing the housing development. And you can see in this photo on the left, the housing development is now really advanced. This is actually quite an old photo, and now the roofing's on and they've started the exterior cladding. Staff from across council provided ongoing specialist support. I have to give mention to the Healthy Waters team that resolved quite a few engineering issues to do with stormwater, and the Regulatory Services team who did a lot of the problem solving, supporting us to get through the consent process. And my team, Māori Housing Unit, we were the glue that kept it all together to try and herd all the interest to get this outcome that you see today before you. The anticipated construction completion will be the end of this year. And these are the projects that I presented to you today. Thank you.
In addition to the information that's presented in your report, we felt this would be helpful for you to get a view of the Cultural Initiatives Fund distribution over the last 5 years. If the code is not immediately apparent, blue parts of the pie graph represent Mātāwaka marae, red the Mana Whenua marae. Sorry, this just does relate to marae, and the yellow highlighting indicates those that have applied this year. So what we're pleased to see and we're working hard at in the background is that there is marae that have either not applied much in the past and or 2 new marae that haven't applied at all in the past, and we're obviously keen on ensuring that all marae understand and can access this grant when they're ready. So this is a nice trend reflected here today. Then there's just a last slide, which is the geographic distribution. So always helpful to see that on a map. Around the left-hand side, you can see that we've got 1 central marae being Te Mahurihiri that Shane just talked to, 4 in the south, 2 in the east and 1 in the west. No applications in the north this year, but they have been strong in the past. So I think this is a reasonably good geographic distribution for the funding. Thank you to the chair. That is all we have to present, and happy to take questions.
Thanks, Jane and Shane and Annie. Just before I invite Patai, I would invite Angela as our Māori Outcomes lead to move this resolution if you'd like to. And Tony, would you be happy to second it? Tony Kaki?
100%.
Yeah, I thought you might be.
Thank you, Kathy.
Open for Patai, and the first question is from His Worship the Mayor. No question from His Worship the Mayor. One from Daniel.
Yeah,
Daniel,
look,
are you there?
Thank you. Yes, can you hear me, Kathy?
Yep, all good.
Hello?
Yep, all good.
Yeah,
We can hear you.
Yep. Okay. Yes. Good morning, Kathy, and good morning, Ani. I just thank you very much for the conversations that we had in relation to the Manireo Marae funding application. I've read the application. I'm familiar with it, and I know that this will be of great interest to the Chief Executive of the Marae. I'm just wondering, have you got any further update as to what you anticipate the scope of work and the total cost for this could be? Because it will need to be significantly more than 170,000, which of course we'll need to get that funding for. So I'm keen to help them. I just want to have the earliest possible indication as to what you think that the final bill could end up being.
Tēnā koe te kaikoinihira, Councillor Newman. Oh, that wasn't me, I hope. No, sorry, we don't have a full costings at the moment. We're actually going through a scoping, and the Marae will come under the Marae Infrastructure Program. So Rosalind Pere-Morris and her team will be going out to visit with the chair. So that's some significant investment, again, on top of the Cultural Initiatives Fund.
Would you anticipate that the scope of works will be broken into two parts, given that the two separate part of the building, the roof replacements, or are we looking at this? I mean, it may well be that this has to be chunked down a bit, and so I guess the scope of works would need to get some reflection about that as part of your assessment. Can you provide that as soon as that feasibility has been undertaken?
Most definitely. Once we get the information, happy to share that with you, no problem.
Thank you, Ani.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya, for the question. I've got two more questions. One from Shane, followed by Glenn. Shane?
Kia ora. I'm just wondering, under section 22 of the report, Te Kaurau Amaki grant, as we know, they have been without a formal marae since the mid-20th century, I think the 1950s or 60s. So I'm just querying why we have reduced their funding, and I acknowledge the points in the report, but I'm wondering if you can talk through it in greater detail, please.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. Happy to talk to that, and also acknowledging that both Ani and Shane play a somewhat of an advocacy role in supporting Marae, whereas I'm sitting on the independent assessment panel for making the recommendations today. So the recommendations in this case is because their existing grant, pretty much as it says in the report, their existing grant is still unspent. They still have funding available from the current year. And we're working closely with them to understand where they think they'll be at year end, acknowledging that a lot of our marae have made fabulous progress in COVID, but have experienced the same delays as everyone else in trying to get construction work underway. So they are clear that they won't spend their fund by the year end. And we do have clear guidelines that we need to stick to in order to be fair and equitable. So the funding that's recommended would bring them up to the maximum of the grant value in 2022-23 when combined with the leftover from this year.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Just one last follow-up question. Would a reduction in this funding mean a reduction in their progress for building the marae?
Thank you. That's a good question, and somewhat one that really the marae needs to answer, but based on really good conversations that I do know actually Ani's been having with their chairperson, they do still require additional funding in addition to what will be needed, what has been recommended here. So there will be more time needed, but however they can get the bulk of the work completed as we understand it with the last year's funding and this year's funding. So hard to say on timing. It is really up to somewhat of their capacity as well as the funding capacity, but it will advance most of the work needed to get to resource consent.
Sorry, Chair, I've thought of a question of a completely different issue, and thank you very much for that. But if you don't mind, one last question, I think. The Te Atatu Marae, do we have any kind of very brief kind of update on where that's at, or is that kind of out of scope of our korero today?
Well, look, I'm happy to take a korero offline, but in relation to the Cultural Initiatives Fund, which is the subject of today's, they are the recipient of a grant a few years ago, and that is some part of that is unspent and buried into this current financial year, and they're making good progress, but the rest of it's, they aren't an applicant this year, so I'm happy to talk to you offline.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Shane. I've got Glenn, then Linda, then Joe. So over to you, Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the Hakamatairanga Mega Tohutohu number 20. And just reading that paragraph, it gives me the sense that this is that marae may be competing for funding. And e hara tēnā te tikanga o tēnei kaupapa. So I'm just trying to understand that. Because it was always that each marae, there was never an issue about the marae applying, but we should never get into this kaupapa of competition between marae for funding. So that's what I wanted to ask about, because I get the sense that there may be some kind of competition here, or that they're competing for funds, and that was never the purpose and the tikanga of this kaupapa. So I just want to comment on that.
Kia ora, Member Wilcox. The paragraph earlier on as well talks about the fact that immediately prior that we have a $1.2 million fund available and 1.8 worth of funding requested. So it is oversubscribed, and that does in itself bring a level of competitiveness into this contestable grant. And to acknowledge that that's been the case for the last few years, which is a great success story, because when this grant first was created, it wasn't oversubscribed. So it's the awareness of it and the value that it brings is certainly now well known. So yes, we were in a situation where the fund was already oversubscribed on the day of closing, and Papatuanuku asked for a late application. So in the interests of fairness and equity, we asked a few more questions as to why it was a late application. In this case, it was simply a mistake on terms of when the due date was diaried, but they had everything else in place. So we thought it was fair and equitable in this situation to open up the system to enable them to put their application in, but not to extend the whole program for all marae, which would delay the decision making for all marae, which is also a disadvantage for people. So it's not so much that it was creating extra competition, it was just trying to bring as much fairness and equity in an already oversubscribed fund. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I have a supplementary to that. So what are we doing, and what is the kaupapa and the tikanga going forward where they've not been able to get the funding they require? Because what we don't want, one of the things we don't want, and one of the things we started this kaupapa about was continually making applications. Each year they have to make an application. And that was the purpose of this fund, was so how do we make allowances for that?
That's a great question, Member Wilcox. There's two things that might be helpful to understand in this context. One is that each year, even where we've been oversubscribed, the recommendations that have been put forward are usually fulfilling as much as is practically possible of the requests of both marae and papakāinga. And where we are declining or reducing the amount, as this report describes, it's usually because many of these projects are quite large scale and quite long term. Many aren't quite ready, or their applications aren't complete. So that's where Ani and Shane work very closely in the background and talk about when the next funding rounds are available, how we can work with them in the meantime to get their applications ready, also what other funding options are available. So it's usually not about simply no, it's actually how can we help you to get the funding at the right time. In addition to that, it's important to recognise that we do have another regional program called the Marae Infrastructure Program, and this is a non-contestable grant, and it's as per the guidelines that PACE signed off, it's equitable investment in all 32 marae that are already built. And so what we're finding is that we can talk to marae about how and when the Marae Infrastructure Program can partner with each of the marae, and in the meantime, if there's emergency, apply to the Cultural Initiatives Fund. So the two funds are working together really well to ensure that there's always an option for marae to be able to advance their aspirations or address the issues.
Thanks, Glenn, and thanks, Jane. I've got 3 more patai, one from Linda, Joe, and a follow-up from Shane. Could you indicate, please, in the chat if you'd like some whakaro? And I've got Tony down already. So over to you, Linda.
Sorry, did Councillor Hills have one there before me?
I haven't seen Richard, but I can put him on the list.
I can see it. I can see
You might
it.
not have
Anyway.
been able to see it. Maybe.
Have I missed you, Richard? I'm terribly sorry. Would you like to just go in now then? I'm terribly sorry.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Cooper, and thank you, Chair. Just a quick comment, and maybe it's not for this item, but the Uruamo Maranga Ake, I just do we have a brief update on where they're at, or is it easier to talk offline? It's just they did receive some funding through this, but I have only heard dribs and drabs of exactly what is happening through the consent process and what the progress is with their marae in Beach Haven.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Similar to the question about Te Atatu, yes, they are a grant recipient in previous years, not applied for funding this year, so not subject of this report, but I'm happy to give you an update after this meeting. But there is good progress being made, and quite a lot more I could add to that, or Ani could add to that, who's leading the relationship with the marae after this meeting.
Kia ora, we'll set up a meeting. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Jane. Linda, over to you.
Thank you. Mine was just around the process. So just noting the kind of bar graph in the report around the spread of grants over the years. It is sometimes is a matter of, some marae have strong governance and organisations. As often as getting a grant really down to that, and how much help are we able to assist in kind of capacity? Because I've got a marae up the road from me, and I know the governance hasn't been strong for many years, and you see things deteriorate, but you kind of know that there's not a lot of capacity to kind of access grants like this because of that, because everybody's a volunteer. Or is that a different process maybe through Ngā Matarai, or just in kind of capacity?
Kia ora, Councillor Cooper, a great question again, and just once again acknowledging both Ani and Shane and their roles. So that's absolutely what we're set up to do, is to support the marae and Papakainga to be able to find an easy navigable pathway. Yes, there is some paperwork and some systems, but literally that's why the differentiation of roles sitting at the table and reporting to you today. I don't get involved in that because I sit on the panel and bring the recommendations, but Ani and Shane are happy to sit with them, help with systems and processes. So that's why I think it's a good trend we're seeing in that graph, that we are seeing more new applicants come on, but we acknowledge there's a lot more to do. But we believe we're set up to do that, and just need to keep working together, and that includes yourselves as councillors that may be able to help connect marae at the time they're ready.
Yeah, tēnā koroa, Ani and Shane. So just with the report back about Te Atatu marae and Te Hinga, if we could just set up a quick meeting with Shane and I to get an update, because it usually goes through local boards, so we don't hear it. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Final question from Joe.
Thank you, Chair. All right. Kia ora, Jane. Kia ora, Ani. Kia ora, Shane. My question follows on from Councillor Newman's question in regards to Rua Pōtaka Marae. We had an excellent celebration there recently. And thank you to Councillors Dalton and Collins, Filipaina, and who attended and celebrated with us. I wanted to know, do we have any idea of the figures that they're going to be needing for their marae upgrade and development there? Because 100 grand is great, but it's not going to get us the marae that we aspire to for our community.
Yeah. Kia ora, Councillor Bartley. Great question. We do have a very detailed breakdown of what the funding is likely to be needed for the aspirations of the marae. I don't actually have them in front of me, and I'm not sure they would like them called out in a public meeting. But there's certainly many more zeros required than we can assist with through the cultural initiative. And so that's where this need to work in partnership with other funding agencies and need to think about other ways of breaking down the development and helping, in terms of phasing and helping through the various phases in ways to smooth processes and make timeframes more efficient. But certainly the Cultural Initiatives Fund will be one of their, they have indicated they will be coming back to the Cultural Initiatives Fund annually to continue to use this avenue to help support the development, but it won't be enough. There is also the Marae Infrastructure Program that they will be part of that will support that development.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jane. Before we move on to Tony Kake for Whakaaro, I'd just like to ask Angela, as the Māori Outcomes Portfolio Lead, if she'd like to close the debate after Tony. Over to you, Tony.
Tuatahi tēnei te mihi atu kia koutou. Jane, Ma, Annie, Shane, nei rā te kara mihi atu kia koutou. Thank you for your tremendous work in supporting our marae across the Tāmaki Makaurau. As a recipient a few years ago, we now have the first 6 of 9 kaumātua units finished, and this back then it was only 150k. That was the maximum given out, but certainly appreciated. So I just wanted to acknowledge you guys and the work that you do behind the scenes. Yes, giving the money out, and it is in the scheme of some of the funding applications and proposals, the 170, the whatever contribution, it's a contribution. It's certainly, but I think some of the work that goes on behind the scenes that people like Shane and Ani do is also of value. You know, the doors that they're able to open, the conversations that they're having with 10,000 other council staff, that means marae people don't have to have those conversations, is gold. So I just wanted to acknowledge your team, Jane, and appreciate the significance of this funding and how it makes a huge difference. You know, I saw the electrical supply photo that I think Shane put up or Ani put up, and mate, without that, that's a health and safety issue. You know, that's priceless. That's gold. So just that's the stuff we should be supporting, because it's not easy to get funding, but the type of work that your team does, Jane, is really appreciated for all marae across Tāmaki Makaurau. One thing though, I think it's paragraph 42. It says staff will work with the relevant councillors and notify all applicants of the outcomes. I'd love to be included. I'm not a councillor, I'm an independent Māori Statutory Board member, but part of the decision making, shucks, I'd love to be included when the news is given to our marae across the muti. I'm not that I'm trying to do it for votes or anything, but I think it's just part of the process. Ka pai, kia ora. Thank you.
And so say all of us, Tony. Thank you very much. And before we put the fantastic resolutions, I'll move over to Angela to close the debate.
Kia ora, Councillor Casey. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm going to be a bit repetitive because I was going to say the same things as Tony. But from a tangata tiriti person's perspective, it's really heartwarming to see all of this mahi that's taking place. And yes, thank you to Shane and to Ani, because it is all about relationships. So it is the funding that we can provide, but it is opening the doors to those other avenues and being so connected out there with our marae. And it is good to see that, I mean, the photos that showing us of what have been achieved is really great to see. I like what you've done, Jane. I know that you've been pushing equity across marae, and the graph that you showed, you can see you're actually targeting that equity. So thank you for leading that, and for Shane and Ani doing the mahi on the ground. So congratulations, everyone. Some really good things happening out there for marae who have been so critical to us during COVID, absolutely, but everything else that comes post-COVID and into the future. So kia ora.
Here, Angela. And thanks from Alfie and from me for all the hard work behind the scenes. We know what goes on. And it's my great delight to put the resolutions. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Back to you, Offie.
Kia ora.
My mate. Thank you so much. And it is a very good story to put out there. So thank you, my mate. Look, we're going to have a break for lunch for those that want to. Pardon? Yep. But we're going to have that after item 12, just a dozen. So I'm going to, I'll move that